Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com, and we'd love to talk to you about hosting your telescope here under our dark skies, or if you're interested in an hourly rental, we also have scopes that we rent by the hour for particular targets. We even have a scope that you can rent by the month. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Interesting. So this image of the Crescent Nebula to the Tulip Nebula and including WR134, this is an HOO image. It's a 3-panel mosaic, and I've captured some more data, so now I'm going to create this image as an SHO or possibly HSO. I'll have to see how the data plays out. But it's a little bit complicated doing a 3-panel mosaic of SHO data. So I want to show you how I approach it using PixInsight and Photoshop. We're going to start in PixInsight, and I've already done some of the kind of beginning basic work of running WBPP. The important thing is I've loaded all of the light frames into WBPP, and then I set a pane as the grouping keyword, and then I adjusted it like this, so you can see that the check mark is on post. And what that does is it causes WBPP to differentiate the master lights by pane when it gets to the integration process. And then each one is registered to a master file within that pane. So the end result then is 9 files. So you've got 9 master files, 1 each for the 3 panes, 1 each for the 3 filters. So you have an SHO for pane 1, SHO for pane 2, and so forth. I then loaded all of those in. I just opened each file, and I've done just kind of the basics of either running either Graxpert or DBE in subtract mode to remove any gradient that might be there. And then I ran Blur Exterminator just to sharpen up the image. And the last thing I'm doing, I'm down to the last 2 frames here. So for each one of these frames, I will update the screen transfer function so that it's current. And the usual, drag that triangle down to the histogram transformation tool, apply the stretch, turn off the screen transfer, and then save this as a 16-bit TIFF file. And then I just minimize them as I go, so now I'm down to the last one. Update the stretch, drag the triangle, apply the stretch, turn off screen transfer so it's only being stretched once. File, save as, convert to a TIFF, save, and we want this as a 16-bit TIFF. So now I have saved these 9 files as 16-bit TIFFs, and they're stretched. And they're ready to start working with in Photoshop. You'll see we're going to come back to PixInsight, but the first thing I want to do is assemble the 3 mosaics, SHO. And we're going to do that in Photoshop because it's the fastest, easiest, almost foolproof way of doing it that I've ever seen. So let's go to Photoshop, and I'm going to do, as I normally do, start with scripts, load files into stack, which brings up this dialog box where I can now browse to find the files that we just saved, and they should be right here. So there are 9 TIFF files. Well, apparently I saved those in the wrong place, so let me find out where I saved them. So to do that, I'm just going to exit out of here. Things don't always run smoothly, especially when you're recording. So We'll just try one again and see. Apparently I didn't pay attention to the folder. That's saving it as a master. So let me look again. I think I know what I did wrong. So we'll browse, D drive, swap files. There they are. So we have 9 TIFF files just created today. Click OK, and then OK again. And now Photoshop will load these 9 files. Each one is an individual layer. If you've watched any of my videos before, you know that this is how I always start my processing in Photoshop. While it's loading, one thing I wanted to mention was the reason I used the screen transfer function just in its plain vanilla format. It gives you a pretty good starting point. You can usually do a little bit better if you tweak it, but it gives you a very suitable starting point without clipping either the whites or the darks. But it's also very consistent, and in this case consistency was more important to me than trying to optimize them. I could probably optimize each one a little bit more, but I doubt if I could optimize them consistently across all 3 of the same filter. So this way I just feel like I'm getting a more consistent starting point for the step now, which is going to be assembling the 3 mosaics. And this is one of those things that you would think shouldn't work, but it does. Get myself out of the way here. Here you can see the 9 files that were loaded. So each one of these is an individual pane of either sulfur, hydrogen, or oxygen. And I'm just going to click on the first layer and shift click on the bottom layer so that I select all of 9 layers. And then I'm going to go to the edit in the menu bar and choose auto align layers, and that gives you a little pop-up window, and I'm just going to choose auto. And I don't think I need vignette removal or geometric distortion, so we'll just let it run as it is. The reason I'm not using the vignette removal is because these are calibrated files, so they probably don't have a lot of vignetting. And just like magic, Photoshop has assembled the 3 sets. So this first group of 3 happens to be the sulfur, so I'm just going to select those 3, hit Control G, and then I'm going to label this sulfur. And that looks pretty good all by itself. The next group is oxygen, and again Control G, put these in a group labeled oxygen. This one has a little bit of a potential problem with this black stripe where things didn't quite line up correctly. And let's see, that is on this middle layer. So what I'm going to do is grab the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm just going to draw a very small box around that to select that, and then just tap delete. And what I did was just delete that black bar from this pane of the oxygen panel so that when I blend these together, Photoshop won't have to deal with that. And let's turn that off. Here's the last one. This is our hydrogen. And again, we have a little bit of a stacking artifact on this middle layer. And actually we have one on the top layer too. So I'm going to start by getting rid of that on the top layer, and then on the middle layer we'll do kind of the same thing here. And I'm just double clicking to connect the dots to make this an enclosed box. Now that we have the 3, these 3 layers, and these are aligned, but they're not blended yet into a single image. So the next step is I'm going to select these 3 layers in the hydrogen group. I'm going to go back to the Edit menu, and I'm going to choose Auto Blend Layers. And again, we get a little dialog box. Blend method will be Panorama. And check the box for seamless tones and colors. Click OK. And what it'll do is adjust the tones if necessary and create masks to seamlessly blend these 3 layers into just one image. And there that is. That looks pretty good, so I'm just going to hit Control E. That would be Command E on a Mac to merge those into one layer. And I'm going to add a solid color fill layer to put at the bottom, so that we, instead of having a transparent boundary, we have a black boundary. There you can see the black boundary that we have around it. So let's do the same thing with our oxygen. We'll select those 3 layers, and again I'm just clicking on one, shift clicking at the other end, and Edit, Auto Blend Layers. OK. This one you can see there's a little bit of difference where they overlap, and when it's done blending you probably won't be able to see any effect there at all. That's one of the advantages of doing this. It just kind of seamlessly blends those together. Control E, and sulfur is last. Select all 3. Auto Blend Layers. OK. So once this is done, we now have a panorama of each one of the 3 filters: sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the amazing thing to me is how well Photoshop aligns everything. If we zoom in and let's turn the sulfur layer on and off, you can see the stars are right in the same place. So it has aligned, apparently giving preference to the stars versus the nebula. It just amazes me that it does that. At this point, I am going to adjust the stretch a little bit. So I'm going to darken the blacks a little and maybe brighten the brights so that we get a little bit more of a dramatic result. And then I'm going to save this, and this time I want to do a save a copy. And the reason I want to save a copy is because I want to save it as a TIFF, and we'll name this sulfur 3. And by doing the save a copy, I get this dialog box, and I can choose to discard layers and just save a copy. So that saves this as just a single flattened image without the layers. We'll turn off the sulfur and do the same thing with the oxygen. I'm going to darken the darks, brighten the midtones a little bit just to give it a little bit more contrast. The darks in these dark areas are getting a little too dark, so I'm actually going to grab my brush tool, tap X to bring black to the foreground, and I'm going to, it's too much, so I'll go 20% opacity. I want to not apply that curve or that histogram adjustment quite as much in these black areas. And again, File, save a copy, and this is oxygen 3. So again, it's saving it as a single flattened layer, and our hydrogen will be last. So again, we'll add a levels adjustment layer, darken the darks, brighten the midtones a little, and again, some of the black areas are getting a little too dark, so I'm going to mask in those areas so that we don't lose any fine detail. And File, save a copy. This is hydrogen. Now that I've saved these, we're going to go back to PixInsight, and I'll just move all these out of the way. What we want to do is load those 3 TIFFs that we just saved, and these are already stretched. So now we can do 2 things. I don't have any RGB data because I've been dealing with the moon, so I'm going to create colorful stars from SHO data. So the first thing I'm going to do is create that SHO layer, and to do that I'm just going to go to channel combination, and we're going to put sulfur in the red channel, oxygen in the blue channel, hydrogen in the green channel. Click the solid circle to execute that. There's our SHO image. And then we have these 3, sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen. And what I want to do now is run Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator on each one of these. On the color image, I want to save the stars, so I'm going to run my Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator. This is actually a process container. So if I double click on it, you can see that it contains both Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator configured for the way I want them to run, for instance, saving the stars. And to execute it, I can just grab this saved process container icon, drag it onto the image, and that way I don't have to, keep clicking and choosing options. I can just click and drag and take a break for a minute, which is what I'm going to do right now while the computer does its work. So it looks like the Star Exterminator is just about to finish on the SHO image. And when that's done, I'll save the stars. I don't need to save the color background because we're going to use a color background created in Photoshop, and this is awfully green and it just makes a difficult starting point. I do want to use these stars though, and I'm going to run one more quick process on it. It's one that again is a process container that I just have labeled Enhance Stars, and it does 2 things. It uses the curves transformation to boost color saturation, and then it runs SCNR to reduce green. Looks like I've got it set for about 73%. Not sure how I came up with 73%. But again, I can just drag that over and drop it on the image, and it will work its magic. I do find that when I put these stars on a more colorful background, they need more saturation in order to really show the color. That's why I boost the saturation here. So the last thing I'll do is save the stars, and these I'm going to save in a different folder. This is going to go into the folder of one that I actually want to save and back up. 16-bit TIFF is fine. And again, this is already stretched data, so you could probably even do 8-bit JPEGs and do just fine. So just to remind me that I've already finished these, I'm going to minimize them. Now we need to run Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator on these 3 layers, or these 3 images. And again, because I'm lazy, I don't want to have to sit here and click one after the other. So I'm going to use an image container. And image containers are usually just created, as you need them. If I right-click here in the background, I can choose image container from the pop-up window. Typically just reset it, and then I want to add views, and you can see there's a lot of views. These are the files that are open. The ones that I want are the hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. I can select those by just double-clicking on each one. Click OK. Now all 3 are selected, and now I can drag this new instance triangle onto a process container for Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator. The only difference is this version of the process container has the settings for Star Exterminator, where it does not create a copy of the stars since we don't need them for this. And we'll let that run for the next few minutes. But at this point, Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator have completed processing, so we now have 3 starless images of the nebula in hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, so that we can put together an SHO image. And so I've already saved the stars. We just need to save each one of these. So File, Save As, and again I want to save these in a different folder now, because this is a folder that I run backups on. And 16-bit TIFF, and then I just minimize them as I go so that I know they're done. So navigate to the correct folder. I know this is exciting to watch somebody save files over and over, so I apologize for the repetition. Last one. And as you might guess, once these are saved, we're now going to go back to Photoshop and start putting together a finished image. So let's open Photoshop, and again we'll go to Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and this time I want to load those files that we just created. So we'll navigate to the correct folder, and here's hydrogen, sulfur, oxygen, and the stars that we just created. And so this is going to load those 4 images as layers in Photoshop. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is rotate this 90 degrees counterclockwise, because I'm used to looking at it horizontally. So just go to Image, Image Rotation, and choose 90 degrees counterclockwise. And there it is. So just a little usual housekeeping. Control G to put each one of these layers into a group. Change the group name based on the filter, and I know I'm going to have a levels adjustment layer, so I'll just go ahead and drop that in. And this is hydrogen, so as you'll see, we're also going to have a hue saturation adjustment layer. And so I can close that group. Sulfur's next. Control G, change the name, drop in a levels adjustment layer, close the group. And last is oxygen, so Control G, change the name, drop in a levels adjustment layer. And I'm going to use a curves adjustment layer to create the color on this one. So I'm actually using 2 different approaches. And I want this curves layer, as you'll see, I want it to be in color blending mode. And this organization is pretty much the same for just about every image that I do, especially if it's an SHO image. It's going to have layers organized exactly like this. Last is the stars. Control G, change the name to stars, and I'll add a levels adjustment layer and a hue saturation adjustment layer. And I'm going to put this group into screen blending mode. And you can't see what I'm doing because the oxygen layers have turned on above it. So we know we want to move the stars to the top, so we'll just drag it up to the top of the layer stack. And this is very magenta. I probably should have run the correct magenta stars on this. So I think I will. I'm going to go back to PixInsight. Here's our stars. Move that out of the way. In Utilities, if you go to Script, let me see. Let's go to Script, Utilities, and Correct Magenta Stars. And I'm going to run that on this. It inverts it, removes the green with SCNR, and then turns it back to what it was originally. And that does look quite a bit better. So you're getting a little bonus process here. So I'm going to save this. we're going to put it in the same folder, and I'll give this a different name. I'll name it Corrected Magenta. Now I'm going to hop back into Photoshop, and we already have the stars, and we want to change our stars layer. So to do that, I'm going to open the file that we just saved, and this will open actually in a new tab. And if you recall, it's in a vertical orientation, so I'll need to rotate it 90 degrees counterclockwise so that it lines up. And now I want to just copy this image over to here, and I want it to go right on top of the stars that I already have. And there's a lot of ways you could do this. We could Control A, Control C, come back to Photoshop, Control V, and now we have pasted that in. And those are a lot better looking stars than the very magenta looking ones. So I'm just going to delete the original because we don't need it anymore. I'm going to boost the saturation a little bit here, and I almost always find that I need to reduce the red saturation. And we'll probably do more star processing, but that's a good place to start. We'll put the stars in screen blending mode, and I'll turn that layer off so it doesn't get in the way. So let's start with our SHO stack. I'm going to put sulfur on the bottom, turn that layer on, and this is going to be kind of the foundation of the image. And one of the things I don't like about this, you can kind of imagine where pane 1 and pane 2 separate, especially here at the bottom. It looks like there's some gradient down here that makes the pane 1 look different than pane 2. So I'm going to add a separate levels adjustment because we're going to use a mask on this. And I think I will need to add more contrast. And I'm really just looking at this corner, and I want to try to match this part to this part. So I'm going to need to add a mask to that. I'm going to grab the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to try to just draw right along that boundary, and then apparently it doesn't like working underneath my picture, so I'll try it again. Polygonal lasso, we'll start so that's selected now. If I fill this with black, it filled the wrong part, so I can just, so now we have a mask, and you can see that actually I've gone probably a little too far. So I want to try to adjust this so it looks like it is seamless with the part on the right. And I'm going to blur this mask. If I click on the mask rather than the layer icon, you can see in the properties panel, these are the mask properties, and one of the properties is feather. So I can feather the mask, which is basically blurring this boundary. That looks pretty good up till about here. So I want to mask out most of the rest of this because it's too strong. So in order to do this non-destructively, I could paint right on this mask, but then it's a little bit difficult to undo. So what I'm going to do, you can only have one pixel mask. You can have a pixel mask and a vector mask on an individual layer, but I want a second mask so that I can mask the mask. And to do that, I'm going to put this levels adjustment into a group, Control G, and this group now can have its own mask. And now I can paint with black, and I'll just start at 100% opacity, which I get by tapping 0 on the keyboard. And you'll see when I start painting with black on this mask, it will mask the entire layer. So something like that looks pretty decent. Looks like there's a hole there. Don't know if that was a factor or not. And now we can come back in here and really try to fine-tune and let's revisit the mask feather. That looks pretty good. I'm going to have to do just a little bit of fine-tuning by burning and dodging right along that boundary. To do that, I'll go ahead and do it inside this group. So I'll add a blank layer, put it in soft light blending mode. This is kind of the universal burning and dodging technique for any kind of photo in Photoshop. I can now paint on this blank soft light layer with either a white brush or a black brush, and I can just tap X if I have my default colors selected here, which you can get by tapping the D key. X will switch between white and black, white brightens, black darkens, and we'll go to 10% opacity by tapping the 1 key. And I think I need to just lighten a little bit right through here. And of course I had black selected, so I need to undo that with the history panel. Tap X to get white. That looks like that blends a little better. And that's kind of a minor feature, so I'm going to stop there. The sulfur is going to be red, and this, so it's going to serve as our backdrop. And then we still have our levels adjustment here where we can do a global adjustment to the sulfur. And usually I'll want to move the white slider in to where it's almost clipping, and the same with the black. We don't want it quite to clip, but we want to create as much contrast here as we can, and you get contrast by darkening the darks and brightening the whites, or the lights. Let's make this a color image now. And it's already a color image in this case, because we loaded one of the TIFF files that we loaded was an RGB image, so Photoshop converted the whole document to RGB. We can confirm that by looking at image mode, and we can see that the RGB color is the one that's checked. If we hadn't had an RGB color layer in here, if these were all 3 monochrome, in order to go any further, we would need to convert from grayscale to RGB color. But it's already an RGB color image, so we're good to go. I'm going to turn on the oxygen layer, and here I'm going to use the technique that I've traditionally used of turning off the red channel for this layer group. To do that, I'll double click here to the right of the layer name on the layer group, and I'll just use these 3 check boxes in the center and uncheck the red channel. We now have an SHO image, and to me it's a little bit too cyan. I like it to be a little bit more blue, and so we're going to use this curves layer to fine-tune the amount of green. And since it's in color blending mode, it won't affect the brightness, it'll just affect the color of the oxygen. So we'll target just the green channel, and I'll just grab the right side of the curve and pull it down to get a more pleasing color of blue. And we'll probably need to come back and adjust this. And again, this is a non-destructive workflow. So now we have an SHO image. The next step is going to be to add the hydrogen, and this is the one that serves as kind of our overall global color balance. It has a little bit of the same problem in pane 1. So I don't know if pane 1 suffered from more clouds or why that's the case. I'm going to try an easy shortcut. I'm just going to grab this layer group that we did in Sulfur. I'm going to duplicate it with Control J, and then I'm going to just drag this whole adjustment group up into the hydrogen group so I don't have to start from scratch. I'll turn off the soft light layer and just start by adjusting just the curves layer. That appears to blend pretty well. That we might want to take a little bit more out up here so that we're really affecting mostly the area at the bottom. And we'll say that's good enough for now. So in order to add color with hydrogen, what I'm going to do is go to this hue saturation. If you look at any of the videos of, for instance, processing Hubble or James Webb images, this is the same technique they use to color all of their layers. I like it for the hydrogen. I don't know if I have a good reason for preferring to use the channel and the curve for oxygen in an SHO image. It just feels like it works better for me. But for hydrogen, the easiest way is to use this hue saturation, and to do that on the hue saturation properties panel, we're going to change that to colorize, and then we'll take the lightness down to about maybe 25%. We'll take the saturation all the way up, and then the hue, this is where we change the color of our hydrogen. And then the last thing we want to do is put this entire layer group into screen blending mode. And we now have an SHO image, and we can use the hue slider on this hue saturation to decide what color do we want the hydrogen to be so that it doesn't come out all green. We can use the levels adjustment, and it's not unusual to have to adjust, especially to darken the hydrogen a little bit. And we may need to change the lightness. Again, that's another way of controlling the influence of the hydrogen layer. And it's just a matter of whatever you find is most attractive. Probably need more red from the sulfur, so we'll go back to our sulfur layer group using the levels adjustment, and we'll just brighten the red contribution here. That I feel like it's important to get good color contrast. We may go back to the oxygen and change the green color balance again, because now that we're adding kind of a yellow-green on top. And that's probably a decent starting point. I say starting point, excuse me, because now on top of the hydrogen, I'm going to add 4 more layers. And these are global adjustments. So I'll add a levels adjustment layer for brightness and contrast, a color balance to change the overall color, hue saturation to change the saturation, and possibly rotate the hue a little bit. And then lastly, I'm going to add a solid color layer, and I'm going to fill this with RGB values of 19, 19, 19. The easiest way to do that is in the hex panel, which is selected by default when you open this. Just type 13, 13, 13, and that fills in. These hex values correspond to RGB values of 19. And then we'll put this in lighten blending mode. And that just keeps anything in this image from being any darker than RGB 19, 19, 19. And we can now make our global adjustments. changing brightness and contrast. We can change the color balance rather precisely here on an overall level. We can play with the hue saturation if we want to increase the saturation, or if we want to rotate the hue to be more yellow or more red. This is a global change. If we want to target individual colors, we could target just the reds, for instance, and make them more red. We could target the yellows and make them more yellow to give a little bit more color contrast. We might want to target the blues and adjust those to be less cyany and more blue. We can increase saturation and lightness if we want to. So there's, basically any global adjustment that you might want to make, you can make here. And then the last step is to turn the stars back on and zoom in to see what they look like. To me, the stars are so small and there's so many of them they look like noise. So I'm going to knock out a lot of these stars. I'm going to start by converting the star layer into a smart object, which I right-click and choose Convert to Smart Object. And we're going to use the Dust and Scratches filter, which we can get to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches, and probably a value of about 4 or 5. I'll try 5. We'll knock out all of the little stars without having much effect on the big stars. And then typically you do need to come back second and run a sharpening. I like to use Smart Sharpen. It doesn't have to be real aggressive. A relatively small radius will kind of restore some sharpness to the stars that got blurry. So there's an SHO version. I would like to, I'm not sure if I like how blue the crescent is coming out. So I may come back to the hydrogen and see if there's a better color balance in here that just is more pleasing. We can also, because this is Photoshop, if we want to make local adjustments, if I want to increase the hydrogen or decrease the oxygen, we can use, again, some local burning and dodging, which you might use at any point to even out the tones. For instance, there's kind of a dark spot here, a bright spot here. There's still some imbalance here. Now that we've added color, you can see that. Let's start with our sulfur and come back to our levels adjustment. That is probably a little bit, probably blends a little better with the area next to it. Might need to do something similar with hydrogen. This is really the value of non-destructive editing. It lets you, you're never committed. If you're doing this with pixel math in PixInsight, once you run it, you're done. With Photoshop, in a non-destructive workflow, you always have the option to go back and change things even after you've saved the image. We will save this as a 16-bit large document format with all the layers intact just the way they are here, so that I can reload it later today, tomorrow, next week, whenever. If we want to do some global burning and dodging, I would typically add that below the levels adjustment. So I'll add a blank layer and again put it in soft light blending mode. And then with my brush tool at 10% opacity, I can just go back and forth between lightening and darkening by tapping the X key now. So I might want to brighten this area a little bit, darken that, brighten this, darken some of the perimeter, brighten that background, brighten that. So this is basically, just your usual artistic burning and dodging that you would do to not lose detail in some areas. You could do the same processing with a landscape. So this is not really unique to astrophotography, nor is it prohibited with astrophotography. It's just a matter of evening out the tones. If I turn this layer off and on, then you can see the effect that it had. So it's not adding anything or subtracting anything, it's just evening out the lights and the darks so that it looks a little bit more balanced. If I turn this solid color layer off and on, we can see if it's having any impact. And for them, doesn't look like it is. One way to judge that is, again, with the polygonal lasso tool. I'll just make a diagonal selection across the image and fill that selection with black. So now I have masked this solid color fill layer, and as I adjust the black level on this levels adjustment, I can start to see how far I can darken this before it gets too dark. And you can see I can go quite a ways down. You go too far. Here you can see this diagonal line. This is darkened without the solid color fill layer, and then the top part is with the solid color fill. And generally you want to push it down to where you can just start to see an effect, and then you may need to lighten up. It's all about contrast. To me that looks just a little too dark, so I'm going to take it back up. But that gives us more overall image contrast. You only get so much light and dark to work with, so the more you can use the full histogram, the better. And I think I'll darken that just a touch. So I'm going to stop here, I think, at least for the video. I will probably continue to tweak this and play with it, so the final image I post may look somewhat different from this. But that showed you quite a few of the techniques that you can use. It's amazing to me how you can go from a three sets of 3 panes of data and put those together in Photoshop into a panoramic mosaic very easily. It's almost too easy. So I say it seems like it shouldn't work, but it does. So with that, I will save this as I'll go to Save As, and I'm going to save this as an official file now, so I'm going to save it in my 2024 photos. So let's navigate to my Photos folder in 2024 as a large document, and this is the 3 SHO. So I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, drop those in the comments below, and I'll be happy to try to sort them out for you. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.